Hey everyone, welcome to this month's OpenFL Roundup. Technically, it's the our first event. We were supposed to have one last month. The scheduling didn't work out, and it was the Friday after American Independence Day, and uh, yeah, things just didn't work out. But um, doesn't quite matter. Hasn't gotten really big yet. Obviously, there's only a couple people here. Hopefully, we get things kind of rolling with the momentum and do this kind of regularly, and we can talk about some of the things that are going on behind the scenes. Hopefully, we'll get Joshua and Josh in here at some point in the following events. Uh, so yeah, I thought it would be pretty neat if we could, start talking about some of the things that have been going on each previous month. The main idea is to have the roundup on like the first Friday of every month, or Thursday or Saturday, or whenever we can really get people in the community to interact and have fun with this, and be informative and kind of have a discussion. Hopefully, do like little Q&A session. Things haven't always been super transparent with things like the roadmap, and hopefully we can sort of streamline those sorts of things and make everybody feel a little bit more connected, and build a little hype and get things rolling. So the first thing I actually wanted to talk about was the upcoming release cycle. I don't know if any of you guys have been paying attention, but we are getting ready to release OpenFL 9.4 and 8.2. We've actually merged some of those repositories into the development branch, so we can kind of prepare for the next release cycle over the next. I think we're shooting for like August, middle of August. I know what today is, the 2nd of August. So we're shooting for probably the next 2 weeks. We'll be releasing those two versions. Right now we're kind of just making sure that everything is stable. We've done a feature freeze, so I wouldn't expect any new things to too much more new features to pop up. I know we have. Well, I've been working on WebSockets. We have had support for WebSocket in the HTML target for a very long time. Obviously, the browser natively supports WebSocket. It only supports WebSocket, so our socket implementation for the browser actually is dependent on the WebSocket. We don't have support for things like WebRTC and things like that. So, really excited about the desktop WebSocket. That's a new thing. I don't know if it's going to end up being in OpenFL 9.4 or not. The internals are in there, and because of the feature freeze, I don't know if there's enough time to get it actually ready for release by the due date for our release cycle. But we'll see. That's one exciting thing. I know it's kind of been a point of contention that if you have a cross-platform application that's running WebSocket, obviously in the browser, and you wanted to build an application for the desktop or Android or whatever, and you basically either had to use something like a reverse proxy server to go from the socket to WebSocket, or you would have to build a socket backend as well as a WebSocket backend, and that can be really kind of difficult to manage. So hopefully with the new WebSocket for native and for native and Neko and Hashlink, we can start, enabling people to build their clients, with a single protocol on native and WebSocket, native and HTML5 for the WebSocket. And the other part of that is we're also, if you're familiar, we introduced the server socket in I think it was OpenFL 9.1, I think. Yeah, the Colossus WebSocket plugin, it's really nice too, but it's also nice to have, integration with the actual library. And I think Adobe Air the Harman Air just introduced their own WebSocket API, so it kind of lines up with that. Our API is a little bit different. What was I saying? The last couple versions we introduced, I think it was 9.1. We introduced Socket Server, and using OpenFL to create any kind of server it's kind of it's kind of niche. You probably wouldn't use it in production. It's handy. You can make little applications, things like that, testing, quick prototyping. But it is there, and with the new WebSocket update, we're also going to be including a WebSocket server implementation along with OpenFL, and I think that's pretty cool too. So you can, quick prototype things with the server and their client without having to leave OpenFL, and you also get first-class support with both of those things. What else? Let's see. I see Josh has been working on, implementing the so he's been working on implementing AMF3 support within OpenFL. We used to have to you used to have to rely on the format library dependency for the AMF3. And so he has actually been working on integrating that directly into OpenFL, which is a plus. I mean, if you use AMF3, that's great. The HAX serialization format works just fine too. Let's see. Recently, Geppetto has been working on the the latest Raspberry Pi integration for Lime. We've had a bunch of bug fixes and lots of other things. Let's see what else. The 8.2 update, I guess a lot of you already probably know. We've done a huge overhaul on our submodules. Basically, it allows us to streamline the submodules and be able to use the upstream version a lot easier than we used to. I know a lot of our old submodules were, we had to actually directly copy them in, and that's never a very good, it's not a good situation. It's not very easy to maintain, and Player 03 really stepped up and implemented that, and that's been really great. Super excited for that, for 8.2. What are the couple other things? The thread pool implementation, which is also done by Player 03. Thread pool is a lot more thread safe. The API hasn't changed, so it should be backwards compatible. Really looking forward to that too. I wish he was here to answer any questions about that, or talk about that a little bit more, but in the future it'll get a little bit better, so hopefully we'll get everybody involved. A couple other things. let's see. Well, there's quite a few other things that we've been working on for 9.2 and or 8.2 and 9.4. There's definitely a bunch of bug fixes. I'm looking at the commit log right now. Um, it's been nice to have it's been nice to have Joshua back. He's been kind of MIA for a little while, but he's been kicking up in activity a little bit lately. I think there was a feature branch for MP3. I've also been working on an MP3 implementation. We'll see how that goes. The work Joshua did on I think that was the SDL library, and that may be a better way to go. I think I was doing something with mini MP3. I think that's what Hashlink uses, and since the licensing, the patent has expired on the MP3, we should be able to get that in pretty quickly. It's not going to be an 8.2 and 9.4, but we're probably looking at integrating that soon. Probably before the end of the year, we'll have MP3 support, which will be really nice too, because we all know the pain of having to, if you have a cross-platform application, we all know the pain of having to support both OGG and MP3 format, and that'll be really nice. Let's talk about as we get into the MP3, let's talk a little bit about some of the roadmap features that we have planned for the rest of the year. MP3 is a really big deal. Yeah. Joshua's back too. We all do this part time. Nobody's like making a living off of working on OpenFL. So, sometimes we each one of us, we have to disappear. That's why, we kind of made the leadership changes recently, and Joshua kind of handed things down to me and Josh to take care of, basically so that someone is always at the helm, no matter what life is kind of throwing at us at the time. But yeah, he's been actually pretty active lately. You can go check the comment log yourself. I'm not going to go into every little push, but and comment, but there's some cool things there. There's a couple little nitty-gritty things. But yeah, going back into the roadmap for the rest of the year, there's a couple big things we're looking at. There's actually a discussion earlier today. Josh, Feathers Josh had brought up a little conundrum we have with the hacks, the hack server, the OpenFL server that we use when we compile for HTML5. And currently we have to, currently we're stuck basically bundling the Node.js dependency there to mostly for the purpose of running, our server for HTML5. And he actually created a small library called Snake Server. It's a little, server. You wouldn't use it in production. It hasn't, gone through any kind of security audits or anything like that. I'm sure it only works for like HTML1. But it's good enough for our use case, and it doesn't require, we can kind of get rid of the Node.js in Lime. Yeah, we can kind of get rid of the Node.js and the Lime bundle. It makes it a lot bigger, apparently. We don't need anything really complicated. Let's see. So that's probably a direction we're heading into, is to possibly possibly make it optional. Like you would have to install Node.js yourself and then opt in with a flag, and we would use something like the Snake server with as a default. So that would be coming. A couple other things that we are looking at. I know I've talked about video support. Video support is really a top priority for me because it's a really important feature that we've been missing for a long time, and I know there are license issues with some of the codecs, but most of the operating systems actually have, they have codecs bundled in, and we can, for Windows, we can actually tap into the Windows operating system and get that through the Windows API, and the same for Android and iOS and Mac. The only issue we have there is we would have to use something like we would have to use a third-party library for Linux, either the VLC or the FFmpeg. And I don't see a major issue there, except that we have to we basically have to maintain all these video backends in the native code to support this. So it's a pretty big endeavor, but video is really, really an important feature that, at least for native, that we've been missing for a very, very long time. And I know a lot of there are a lot of applications and games out there that do need video. I think like Friday Night Funkin', they had to go and implement a VLC extension, and it's a lot of work, and it makes a lot more sense if we just integrate that and build out the original Flash API for that and have that and be able to use those kind of formats. I know we've had extensions like the WebM extension. It doesn't work very well. Decoding is really slow in software. We'd rather be able to just tap right into the operating system APIs and rely on hardware decoding for that. And so that's really a priority, possibly for the next year. I would say maybe running into 2005, the beginning of 2005. We're going to start working on that pretty soon, and so we'll have basically all of our media APIs will be somewhat complete, hopefully, as we get into like 9.6, 9.7, maybe even OpenFL 10. I don't know. But that's definitely a big priority. Microphone support, I think, comes with that. I've been working on a couple different experiments with getting microphone input on different operating systems as raw PCM data, so we can actually implement the microphone API that we're still missing it, I think. I'm not sure if any work has been done on it. Would be a lot easier for the HTML5 target. I don't know if any work has been done on that yet or not, because obviously we have the browser APIs for that. Let's see what else. A few other things. A long-standing issue. I'm sure pretty much everybody is familiar with, and that is the main loop in Lime. If anybody who has ever profiled the application knows that if you target your application for 60 frames per second, you're not going to get 60 frames per second. It's going to be like 62 and a half, I think. And that has kind of become a point of contention. I know it's been a pain for a long time, but more recently, I think mostly from the Friday Night Funkin' community, they've been complaining that it causes some desynchronization with the input and the display, and I can see that. It does cause some stuttering. in some applications, especially if you have a big, scrolling background or something like that. So that has been a really big issue that we want to address, and that kind of boils down to what causes it, and it's kind of complicated because the way the main loop works, it basically relies on two different APIs. We need to be able to accurately get the time, between frames. We need to actually accurately be able to measure the time at a fine granularity, and also we need to be able to sleep the thread at a really fine granularity. And the closest we can actually get to is about 2 milliseconds for our sleep. And the other point of contention there is that we also only measure in 1 millisecond durations. So it's kind of a two-faceted problem where we only have the granularity of 1 millisecond, and we can only sleep for so long that it becomes a little bit inaccurate to wake the thread up. So if you actually, and this is the same on most operating systems and most kernels, but if you sleep a thread, the scheduler isn't actually reliable on waking the thread back up in a specified time frame. So if you're like, hey, let's sleep the thread for 16 milliseconds, it may wake up in 17 or 18 milliseconds. It's or 15 milliseconds. It's really hard to determine when the thread is actually going to wake up, and it's really important to actually sleep the thread in between. If any of you have ever made a low-level main loop, it's really important to actually sleep the thread in between frames when you're not doing anything, so we're not just turning the CPU at 100% all the time. So the idea here is to solve both of those problems. The main problem being that we measure time in a granularity of one millisecond, and two, that we need more accurate sleep. So I actually recently frame rate weirdness for the first time this week. So glad, it's being investigated. Yeah, well, it's not quite weird. It's really not like it's not to not be expected. It's very obvious why we have the problems we have. You can't just determine the frame rate, and we have problems with that. Well, most monitors are actually, most monitors refresh at like 60 frames per second at 60 hertz or close to that. And so if you target your application at 60 frames per second and you're not using VSync, and then the application is actually running at 62.5 frames per second, you have all kinds of weird artifacts going on. You've got frame tearing and stuttering and things like that. So it's not good. It's not good for anyone, and it's really noticeable especially if you have a game that requires really smooth movement or large animations on the screen. If you have a big scrolling background or a tile-based game or something like that, it's really, really noticeable, and it can be really irritating. And you don't always want to use VSync. VSync introduces some latency to the input and things like that. So it's not really always an option. We do want to get the frame rate to be accurate, and so I actually did. We have there's a feature branch in Lime currently. I've been working on that. So the idea for that is to actually improve our sleep cycle. So instead of relying on the scheduler to wake the thread up in time, the idea is that we can sleep for a shorter duration in a window where we know the thread is going to wake up before the frame expires, and then we will churn the CPU for just a little bit of time. So we'll sleep for for example, if The frame rate set to 60 frames per second. That gives us like 16.667 milliseconds. So we'll actually sleep for, let's say, 13, 14, 15 milliseconds. We handle it in kind of a smart way that determines what the the margin of error is for the scheduler waking up the thread. We kind of figure that out and correct that as we go along, as the application runs. And after a few seconds, we get that very, very accurate. So we will actually just sleep for like 15 milliseconds, 14, 15 milliseconds, and then for those last 2 milliseconds or whatever is left over of the thread, we'll actually use a while loop, which keeps checking the time. And it's not 100% ideal, but we don't have, the other option is to just churn the CPU the whole time with a while loop. That's how we get the most accurate time, is with, if we're checking the time every, if we're just turning the CPU, checking the time in a loop and a while, like a while true loop, which isn't really ideal, because then you get 100% CPU on that thread, and that's what we're really trying to avoid. But the idea of sleeping for like 99% of the thread time for the frame time, and then putting it into a while loop for like the last duration to make sure we get that accurate, so we can get the accurate update with the render when we're not using VSync. So you can actually have dependable frame rates. And then the other idea is that we use an API in Lime that only gives us measurement in 1 millisecond granularity, and so that's kind of an issue too. And there are cross-platform, like C++ APIs that we can use to get the time better. But my idea, and it's not exactly confirmed, it's what we're going to do, it's what I'd like to do, but my idea is to actually bring the main loop logic, which is right now it's in SDL application, in our it's actually in a CPP file in SDL. We don't have a problem in HTML5, so this doesn't even touch that. But for the native builds, our main loop is actually handled, natively, and I would like to bring that out of the CPP code and implement that directly into Hacks, and actually make that a public API, make that modular, so that for one, we can keep the old logic, we can keep the legacy logic intact in case people have come up with their own workarounds for the weird, like Flixel. I don't know what Flixel does. I think it does something to compensate for the frame rate weirdness. But other libraries or frameworks may have compensated for the legacy behavior, and I don't necessarily want to change that and cause any breaking issues, unless we just and unless we're just going to oh, I see. Unless we're just going to get rid of that in a major version or something like that. If we depreciate that now and then just kind of kick it later on. But the new loop would become default, and then people would have to opt into the legacy. But everything would be in Hacks. So basically, it would allow people to either use the default main loop or build their own. I mean, it's really, really difficult to do anything with the main loop right now. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can implement a main loop, and not exactly, they don't exactly all work, for everybody's use case. And so it would be so much better to really slap a public-facing API in that and let people either choose the default main loop or plug in their own. I know Flixel would probably be a lot happier if they could plug in their own main loop. Let's see, what else? Talk about a few things in the Hacks, or the OpenFL Hacks umbrella here. I've also been working on, for those interested, we've also been working behind the scenes on a PS5 switch line branch, a PS5 and a new switch line branch. to get those updated. We haven't had PlayStation 5 support in the past. It's not a whole lot different from supporting PS4. The PS5 uses the same the graphics API as the PS4. It's a little bit different, but some groups have recently come forward with a bit of work on a SDL branch for the PS5, and so we've kind of adapted that into Lime, and I've been experimenting with that, and hopefully we will get support for for some of the latest next gen consoles. I know they've been out for a long time, and we haven't really, we claim that OpenFL runs everywhere and we have console support, but the console support area has really been lacking. I don't think anybody's released a PS5 game for OpenFL with OpenFL. And then of course our Lime Switch branch has really lagged behind, and we don't even manage a Xbox branch anymore. Although it's still possible to build, it's still basically possible to build Xbox with something like Angle, to go from OpenGL to DirectX. And so that's another thing that we've really been considering and focusing on. We have a couple teams working on that behind the scenes, and I think it's really important to continue to maintain console support, especially as we get into the next generation of consoles. Hopefully, the Nintendo Switch will still support OpenGL. I know Nintendo's coming out with a new system soon. Nobody knows when, but hopefully they will still support OpenGL. And then let's see, Starling. I don't know if many people really use Starling anymore. I really love Starling. Starling for hacks is great. I know a lot of people use it. Like FlowPlay used it for porting a lot of their games, and people typically use it to port their games. But Starling is really a good library for OpenFL. I mean, the rendering system is a lot more robust than something like Flixel, which uses the graphics API and things like draw quads and draw triangles, which is really kind of limited there with the API. So Starling is really cool, and I don't think Starling gets a lot of love. And I think part of the issue is that Starling 2 is just a simple port. It's a one-to-one port that it's a one-to-one port that really allows people to bring their Flash and Air games over to OpenFL, and I think that's pretty much dead at this point. There aren't a whole lot of people still in the Flash ecosystem that are. If you haven't ported your game already, I mean, you're probably already married to Air or whatever, and you're not going to. So I actually talked to Daniel over at Starling, the author of the Flash version of Starling, and he doesn't have any. They have no plans to release another major version with that coming forward. So I have actually been working on. You can go check out the Starling repository on GitHub, but I have been working on Starling 3, which is going to basically take Starling and optimize it for hacks. So it may include, it's a major version, so it may include breaking API changes and things like that, but we're trying to get it away from just being a port and actually being a library that is optimized. It takes advantage of all the new hacks features, new OpenFL features, things like direct access to OpenGL and the OpenGL context. So we can actually build Starling into a much better library that is seen as a first-class library to use and build your games. I mean, honestly, as far as building a game with a 2D game with OpenFL, Starling is probably, even Starling 2 is probably the most efficient rendering framework and pipeline that you can really use for OpenFL. I know Semi has a really efficient rendering little rendering library called Peyote View, and for Lime, and it's comparable to the performance. For OpenFL, I mean, Flixel, the OpenFL display list, the tile map API, none of it really comes close to the robustness and utility that Starling really brings. So Starling 3 is a really cool and really exciting new pursuit that we'll be working on, probably looking for release at the end of the year. And yeah, that's pretty cool. What else? I think I covered just about everything. The main loop issue is a big one, and we'll be working on that. The context menus. I know that's been something that has been a long time coming as well. I almost forgot about the context menus in OpenFL. If you're coming from Flash and you're experienced and familiar with Flash, then you've probably used or heard of the context menu API. Being able to, if you're building some kind of enterprise application or some kind of tool or something, GUI tool, it's really not it's not easy with OpenFL at the moment, because we're missing some of the really important features that Flash gave us that we just don't have yet, because not necessarily because it's difficult, but because of it is difficult, but it's maintaining the different operating system APIs, and we don't get those things from our dependencies like SDL. So yeah, it's really exciting. We're going to be looking at introducing new context menus for native platforms. Obviously, our mobile platforms don't use context menus, but if you're building an application in Windows or Mac OS, soon you should be able to change things like the top menu bar, the Chrome bar, have a native Chrome menu, and let's see, for Windows you'll be able to do things like having a tray icon in a tray icon menu. And then we'll be able to use like right-click menus or custom menus and things like that follow the original Flash API. And you can actually check some of that out now. We do have it working for Windows. There's a draft API in OpenFL 9.4. I think it's in the dev branch right now. You can actually go check that out. There's a couple other goodies in there too, like window transparency. That's another thing we haven't been able to do. It's simply just because SDL doesn't support it, and it always gets kind of weird trying to support things and build our own dependencies, and then have to integrate that into Lime. It's always easier when one of our huge dependencies or when windowing libraries like SDL supports all these features. So we haven't had them for a very long time. So I mean, if you want to check some of that out, it's in the OpenFL draft API in the display package. Tray icons, native context menus, things like that, the window transparency. Trying to think if there's anything else. I think I've covered pretty much everything that we're really working on as far as things that we're working on, things that we want to work on. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I'd love if there was, it's a little awkward, I have got one viewer here. It's, and I'm not hating, but it's a little bit awkward. Typically during these events, I'd love to start doing like, a Q&A session and kind of riff off of people's questions and things like that. But yeah, hopefully we can start doing this kind of regularly. Hopefully, I'll get a little bit better at it. I think this is the first time I've ever live streamed. I've made a couple of tutorial videos and things like that, and I'm definitely not used to doing this in a live setting. So it's going to take a little bit of getting used to, and hopefully we can drag Josh and Joshua in here. And I hear my 9-month-old yelling at me. But yeah, hopefully we can get the wider community involved, and I haven't gotten, it's a little awkward right now. I didn't go ahead and post an at everyone, and I didn't make a huge, I was thinking about making an announcement on the forums and things like that, but I think it's a little bit better that we have a tiny audience getting into things. I don't want to turn anybody off as we kind of figure out the format for these things and kind of get used to doing it. So yeah. Thanks, buddy. If there's no questions and I've answered everything and covered everything, I guess we'll just wrap this up now. So thanks everyone, and we'll try and do this again next month. Hopefully we see everybody. Take care.